Welcome to another episode, Chosen One. Funny how you're still here, breathing, thinking, leveling up, while the people who swore they'd handle you are now shaking like they saw a ghost. They're pretending everything is normal, but you can feel it in the air. The plot cracked open. The whole thing spilled out. And guess what? Every little trick they whispered about you behind closed doors is now crawling into the light like bugs after you lift a rock. Look who survived long enough to hear the truth. Yes, you, the one they dissected in private chats, the name that kept resurfacing in conversations you were never supposed to hear. The person they claimed they didn't think about, yet kept studying like a problem they couldn't solve. They wanted you to feel small. They wanted you to feel confused. They wanted you to look in the mirror and question your own reality. But here's the cold part. They were the ones losing their grip. They cracked first. They broke under the pressure of your silence, your growth, your resilience that should have been impossible according to their little prediction charts. And when they cracked, they spilled everything. Every whisper, every plan, every insecure thought they tried to project onto you. If you're vibing with this energy already, hit the like button and subscribe. Pay this message back by keeping this channel alive. Now then, let's go deeper. See, Chosen One, the funniest part is how they assumed you'd collapse on schedule. They had this whole storyline in their heads. You'll crumble by Thursday. They can't handle pressure. Just push a little more and they'll fold. They spoke about you like you were a science experiment. They thought they knew your breaking point. But then the universe flipped the script. You didn't break. They did. You know that quiet moment you had months ago when you wondered if you were just overreacting, imagining how certain people seemed too invested in your downfall, reading too much into the sudden meetings, the sudden shift in tone, the sudden concern. Yeah, you weren't imagining anything. The universe keeps receipts even when you don't. They were terrified of your comeback before you even realized you were making one. Your silence wasn't weakness to them. It was a countdown. Every day you didn't react, every day you didn't collapse, they panicked a little more. They were running simulations in their heads about what you might do next. They were calling each other, trying to figure out how someone like you keeps surviving storms that should have erased you. And here's the wildest part. Their entire plan depended on you doubting yourself. That was the whole blueprint. Not your failure, your self-doubt. You were never the problem. You never were. Let me paint the scene for you, because someone needs to say this out loud. Picture them sitting together, voices low, checking their phones, stressing over your every move. Someone says, "Maybe they're done." Another says, "No, something's off. They're too quiet." Then the silence hits the room. That heavy silence where everyone realizes the same thing. They miscalculated, because the moment you stopped breaking the way they predicted was the moment their plan fell apart. Here's a story you'll understand immediately. Think back to a time when you were younger and people treated you like you didn't notice anything. Maybe it was family, maybe school, maybe work. People talked like you were clueless. Meanwhile, you were watching everything. That same thing happened again as an adult. Except this time, you didn't just watch, you evolved. The universe has this funny habit of leveling you up in private while enemies study the old version of you. They were planning attacks for the person you used to be, not the one you became when everything went quiet. You ever wonder why certain people suddenly backed away? Suddenly got polite, suddenly changed their tone? Because someone cracked under the pressure and exposed the whole playbook. Somebody in their team couldn't hold it anymore and spilled the truth. All the lies, all the manipulation, all the fake sympathy. It came out, and when it did, the whole group felt the blast. That's why everything feels different now. That shift you feel around you isn't imaginary. It's the fallout. Let me break down the psychology of these people, because it's not as complex as they want you to think. When someone plans to break you, they build a fantasy in their head. They imagine the version of you that collapses. They imagine themselves winning. They imagine everyone saying you were right about them. But then life hands them the Uno reverse card. You don't break, you upgrade. And suddenly they're exposed as the ones who were obsessed, insecure, and deeply threatened. Here's another cold fact. They didn't expect you to heal. They didn't expect you to pull yourself out of emotional quicksand. They didn't expect you to rebuild your identity. They thought you were alone. They forgot the universe sits quietly in the background watching everything. That's why now the entire plot against you is collapsing in slow motion. It's embarrassing for them, like dropping their mask in front of the audience mid-performance. And you're probably sitting there wondering, why me? Why were they even bothering with all this behind my back? Because you made them question their own worth without even trying. You made them feel threatened simply by existing. You exposed their insecurities without speaking a word. That's why they needed strategy meetings just to handle you. Let that sink in. You made a whole group of people sit down and build a plan just to deal with you. One person. That's power they don't want to admit you have. I want you to picture this moment. They're all sitting around, stressed. Someone says, what if they rise again? What if they hit a breakthrough? And another person, the honest one, finally blurts, they already did. You can almost feel the room freezing. That's when the truth spills. That's when the plot breaks. That's where this intro begins. Your strength wasn't supposed to exist. Your comeback wasn't supposed to be real. Your clarity wasn't supposed to return, but you rebuilt yourself anyway. And that's what destroyed them. Not revenge, not rage, not chaos. Just you living, breathing, and refusing to die inside. This entire storyline starts at the exact moment they realized one thing they never planned for. You weren't going to break the way they designed. You were going to break their design instead. Before we go any further, Chosen One, take a second to breathe, because what comes next is where the real damage begins. If you're still here, it means you can feel the truth hitting your chest. You can feel that shift in the air now that the whole plot against you has cracked open. And if this message is already waking something up inside you, show some love to the team behind it. Like the video, subscribe, and keep this mission alive so more Chosen Ones hear what was kept hidden from them. Your support, no matter how small, keeps this truth sliding through the cracks they tried to seal. Drop a comment with 777 if you're ready to hear exactly how their plan fell apart, piece by piece. It pulls you in because deep down you know you survived something most people never walk away from. And now, let's slide deeper into it, step by step. If you're truly built for this, you'll feel the pull to stay until the very last word. The next part hits even harder. Let's begin. Number 1. The room that panicked the second your name dropped. Wild how they planned your downfall, yet they're the ones trembling because you didn't collapse on cue. They can deny it all they want, but your name alone changed the temperature of that room. The moment it hit the table, every face tightened, every fake smile slipped, and every person suddenly remembered the version of you they thought they had under control. They weren't meeting casually. This wasn't a friendly catch-up. This was a crisis discussion, triggered by the simple fact that you refused to break the way they predicted. They studied you like you were a system glitch they couldn't fix. They analyzed your reactions, your silence, your distance, your calmness. What bothered them most wasn't what you did, it was what you didn't do. You didn't explode when provoked. You didn't crumble when abandoned. You didn't chase when pushed. You didn't collapse when they built situations specifically to break you. And chosen one, that's exactly where the panic started. Because manipulators only feel powerful when they know how you'll react. When the reactions stop fitting inside their script, their whole sense of control unravels. In that room, they replayed everything in their minds, hoping to find the moment they lost you. The embarrassing truth they didn't want to admit was simple. You outgrew them. Imagine that table. Imagine the silence. Someone finally speaks. Something's off. Another whispers, "They're too calm." A third mutters, "What do we do now?" Every line soaked in fear. They weren't worried about your weakness. They were terrified of your strength. They had built an entire strategy on the assumption that you would collapse under pressure. Their plan depended on your breakdown. Their confidence depended on your confusion. Their power depended on your self-doubt. That was the whole blueprint, and you burned it without even trying. The chosen one inside you might still ask, why was I so important to them? Why did they analyze me like a project? Because your presence exposed their insecurities. Your resilience highlighted their fragility. Your ability to keep going forced them to confront the truth about themselves. They didn't want to face that, so they turned you into the enemy. They tried to study you like a puzzle. But the universe made you a puzzle that changes every time someone thinks they've solved you. You became unpredictable, and unpredictability terrifies people who rely on manipulation. This is where the villain energy in your story truly begins. While they were expecting chaos from you, all they got was silence. And silence, chosen one, is the biggest warning shot you ever fired. Silence is where manipulators lose their power. Silence is where the truth hits them hardest. Silence is where they realize you stopped playing their game. Your quiet wasn't weakness. It was evolution. It was you stepping outside their reach. It was you becoming someone they no longer knew how to control, and that reality hit them like a knife to the ego. In that meeting, someone finally admitted what everyone else was too embarrassed to say. We can't control them anymore. That sentence shook the entire room. It wasn't just about losing power over you. It was about losing the version of themselves that felt superior when you were in pain. You walking away forced them to face the truth that they were never as strong, never as confident, never as threatening as they acted. Your healing exposed their illusion. Your growth became the revenge they never saw coming. Chosen one, understand this deeply. You didn't need to attack them. Your peace was the attack. You didn't need to expose them. Their panic exposed them. You didn't need to chase justice. Their guilt delivered it. The entire plot against you was built on outdated data, old assumptions, and the belief that you would break like regular people. But you don't break like regular people. You bend, you twist, you rebuild, and then you rise stronger than every version they tried to destroy. Think about the times you chose dignity instead of chaos, silence instead of reaction, walking away instead of begging to be seen. Those weren't small choices. Those were earthquakes under their plan. Every moment you healed was a crack in their strategy. Every step you took forward was another piece of their narrative falling apart. They thought they were studying your downfall. Instead, they were witnessing your evolution. They were watching the universe upgrade you in real time while they still tried to use last year's tricks. And now, chosen one, here's the hardest truth they're hiding from each other. They needed a whole room, a whole plan, a whole strategy team just to manage one version of you. A version of you who didn't even know your own power yet. They were scared of you before you even understood yourself. Imagine what that fear looks like now. Imagine their faces when they realize the person they studied is gone, replaced by someone sharper, stronger, and completely unbreakable. The meeting where your name was the only agenda wasn't about fixing things. It was a funeral for their control, a quiet admission that the plot failed, a moment where every single person in that room knew the same thing. You slipped out of their hands and you're never going back. And if you ever forget your worth, remember this brutal fact. They strategized against you because they knew how powerful you were long before you'd... Number 2. When their script stopped working, their fear started talking. Nothing scares a manipulator more than realizing the person they tried to break isn't breakable anymore. They don't admit this out loud, but the moment their control failed, every mask they wore slipped. All that fake confidence, all that fake authority, all that fake superiority they hid behind evaporated. The second your reactions stopped matching the predictions in their little mental playbook. Their whole sense of power was built on one thing: knowing how you would respond. They depended on your old patterns like actors depending on a script. They counted on your pain. They counted on your confusion. They counted on your loyalty to people who didn't deserve you. They counted on your need for closure, validation, or understanding. But then you changed the code. You didn't announce it. You didn't warn anyone. You didn't shout it from the rooftops. You just upgraded quietly, internally, in ways they never expected, and suddenly their manual for controlling you became useless. You started responding differently. You started thinking differently. You stopped giving predictable reactions. You stopped feeding traps with your attention. You stopped allowing your emotions to be weaponized against you. And that's when their fear came crawling out. Here's the first quote that hit them like a punch to the ribs. When you stop playing their game, they lose their identity, because their power wasn't real. Their power was your reaction. Once the reaction changed, everything they built crumbled. Imagine this: they're sitting there with the same buttons they used to push before. But now, nothing happens. They push the guilt button. Nothing. They push the shame button. Still nothing. They push the abandonment button. Silence. They push the chaos button. Peace. It's like someone unplugged their entire system, and they're standing there, hitting dead keys on a broken piano. This is the moment chosen ones always wonder about. Why did they panic when I got stronger? Isn't strength supposed to make people respect you? In healthy people, yes. In manipulators, no. Your strength exposed their weakness. Your clarity exposed their lies. Your healing exposed their strategy. And their reactions weren't respect, they were fear. They weren't afraid you'd hurt them. They were afraid you'd outgrow them. This quote alone tells the whole story. Let's break down the psychology behind their fear. Their control depended on your predictability. They studied your triggers the way someone studies cheat codes for a game. If I say this, they'll panic. If I disappear for 2 days, they'll chase me. If I criticize them just right, they'll lose confidence. These weren't random behaviors. These were calculated moves. But then one morning, without warning, you stopped responding the way they predicted. You didn't chase. You didn't spiral. You didn't beg. You didn't fold. You didn't argue. You simply stopped giving them the emotional fuel they built their control system around. And nothing terrifies a manipulator more than losing a fuel source they thought they owned. Imagine this scene clearly. Someone sitting with a remote control they used to point at you, pressing buttons like anger, confusion, jealousy, fear, expecting reactions, and you just sit there unbothered, unreadable, untouchable. That remote control once felt like a weapon to them. Now it's just a piece of cheap plastic in their hands. They shake it, they tap it, they change the batteries. Nothing works. At this point, the chosen one inside you might think, why didn't they just move on? Why did my growth bother them so much? Because now they have to face life without the illusion of control. They didn't want to lose dominance. They wanted to lose you on their terms. They wanted to discard you, not watch you evolve. They wanted to feel superior, not exposed. Your growth threatened the story they built about themselves. And here comes another quote they'll pretend not to hear. They feared your silence more than your anger. Anger is predictable. Silence is not. Anger gives them material. Silence gives them nothing. Silence forces them to deal with themselves. When control fails, fear shows its face in desperate little ways. Sudden kindness, sudden apologies, sudden fake concern, sudden attempts to check on you, sudden shifts in tone, or worse, sudden hostility because they can't stand that you stopped feeding them emotional reactions. This is fear dressed up as trying to reconnect. This is fear pretending to be closure. This is fear trying to salvage a position they already lost. Imagine this metaphor: a puppet master who spent years pulling strings, making you dance to their rhythm. Then one day, the strings fall to the ground, not because they let go, because you cut them yourself. Now the puppet master just stands there empty-handed, exposed for what they were. Someone who couldn't stand on their own without controlling someone else. That's what your transformation did to them. And here's another brutal line their ego can't swallow. They didn't lose control of you. They lost control of the version of themselves they only felt confident around. Let that hit. They felt powerful because you felt weak. They felt stable because you felt confused. They felt intelligent because you questioned your mind. They felt brave because you were hurting. Your suffering made them feel big. Your healing shrank them back to size. The moment their confidence disappeared, fear stepped into its place. Fear of being exposed. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of losing access to you. Fear of you discovering just how much power you truly had. Fear of you waking up and seeing the game for what it was. Fear that the universe was on your side the whole time. Imagine this next scene. They're pacing, replaying everything, wondering what changed. They can't sleep. They stalk your silence like it's a threat. They ask people about you. They check your energy from a distance. They're trying to predict your next move the same way someone watches a storm approaching on the radar, because when you became unpredictable, you became dangerous to their ecosystem. Now you might be thinking, so what exactly were they afraid of losing? They were afraid of losing the version of you they could manipulate. And that version no longer exists. That's why their fear is so loud now, because the control they thought was permanent was actually borrowed. Borrowed from the moments when you didn't yet see your worth. Borrowed from the times you didn't yet trust your instincts. Borrowed from illusions the universe eventually shattered. And here's a quote you should keep close. Once you learn your power, no one gets to unteach it to you. When their manual failed, they didn't have a backup plan. They weren't prepared for a stronger you. They weren't prepared for a calmer you. They weren't prepared for a version of you who felt no need to argue, prove anything, react or explain. You destroyed their blueprint by evolving. You destroyed their confidence by becoming unpredictable. You destroyed their power by breaking the pattern they depended on. That's when they finally realized They weren't in control. They were just lucky your old wounds made you predictable. Once the wounds healed, so did the pattern. And here's the metaphor that seals this chapter. Think of yourself as a locked door they once had the key to. Except one day, without warning, the lock changed. The key bent, the door upgraded itself, and now they're standing outside, shaking the handle, demanding you open up. But you don't respond. You don't even hear them anymore. Fear stepped in because you stepped out. Fear took over because you took back your power. Fear became their reality because you finally embraced yours. This is the truth they didn't want to face. They never controlled you. They controlled who you were before you knew yourself. Now that you do, they're terrified. Number 3, the moment they realized you weren't breakable, you were bulletproof. They didn't misjudge your weakness, they misjudged your evolution. The line that slipped out of someone's mouth that day hit the room like a gunshot. We thought they were fragile. That was the confession they hoped no one would say out loud because it exposed their entire mindset. They built their whole confidence on the idea that you were soft clay they could shape. Someone who needed them, someone who leaned too much. Someone who would bend if pushed, break if pressured, and return the second they snapped their fingers. That fantasy kept them warm at night. But the universe loves humiliating arrogance, and you were the perfect lesson. Imagine their faces when every shove only made you vanish instead of collapse. They pushed for a reaction. You gave them distance. They tried to guilt trip you. You gave them silence. They tried to weaponize your emotions. You gave them nothing to grab onto. That's when panic set in, because they finally realized something terrifying. You weren't fragile. You were transforming. Here's the punchline they hate the most. Every time they tried to break you, you upgraded instead. You came back different, hardened, clear, emotionally unreachable in ways they never prepared for. You didn't return to apologize. You didn't return to explain. You didn't return to shrink yourself. You returned carrying self-respect like armor they couldn't puncture. And the chosen one inside you might wonder, why did my strength bother them so much? Because without your weakness, they had no power. Without your guilt, they had no leverage. Without your vulnerability, they had no script. They reached for the old handles they used to pull and found nothing there. You removed every emotional hook, every trigger, every guilt knot they once relied on. You became someone they couldn't manipulate, predict, or influence. Imagine a hunter who suddenly realizes the animal they were stalking has grown fangs. That's what you became. Not prey, but something untouchable. You weren't fragile. You were evolving into the version of yourself they never wanted to meet. Number 4, when you turned invisible to their control. They didn't call you a shadow because you disappeared. They called you a shadow because they couldn't touch you anymore. The nickname slipped out behind your back, and trust me, chosen one, it wasn't meant as a compliment. They started calling you a shadow not because you faded, but because you slipped out of every trap they set. You stopped reacting. You stopped explaining. You stopped giving them emotional access. And when someone loses access to the version of you they controlled, they start calling you names to hide the fear they don't want to admit. Imagine this: a group of people sitting together, whispering like kids, scared of the dark. Someone says, "They're like a shadow now." Another nods fast, pretending they understand you, when in reality they're terrified because the old tricks don't work anymore. Their poison doesn't hit, their manipulation slips off, their emotional bait gets ignored. You became something they can't predict, can't provoke, can't break. Here's the quote that stings them the most. You weren't avoiding them, you outgrew their reach. You became immune, and immunity is deadly to manipulators. They rely on your emotional openness to invade your mind. But once you stopped letting them inside, they lost every advantage they thought they had. It's like you built walls overnight, walls they can't scale, walls they can't decode. They're stuck outside, staring at the version of you they used to handle, realizing that person is gone for good. Right now, you might be wondering, why does my distance bother them this much? Because your distance shows them they never mattered as much as they pretended. Because your silence exposes how irrelevant their tactics always were. Because your growth forces them to face their own limitations. Imagine a magician whose tricks suddenly stop working on one person in the audience. Panic sets in. That's what happened here. You became the glitch in their system, the exception they can't fix. They called you a shadow because they can't catch what they can't control. You didn't disappear. You simply became untouchable. Number 5. The spies that failed their mission. Funny how they planted people in your life only for those same people to end up impressed by you instead of reporting on you. Here's the twisted truth they hoped you'd never discover. Not everyone who walked into your life came on their own. Some were placed, sent, positioned like pieces on a board. Certain friendships, sudden supporters, convenient listeners. Yeah, those weren't accidents. They were there to watch you, poke at your weak spots, and carry back information to the people plotting behind the scenes. They weren't sent to love you or uplift you. They were sent to test you like a lab experiment. Imagine this scene. Someone sits across from you pretending to care, asking the right questions, waiting for you to crack. Meanwhile, they're mentally recording everything, hoping you'll expose some unhealed wound they can take back as evidence. But you didn't. Your silence confused them. Your strength annoyed them. Your growth made their job impossible. Here's the quote that hits them like a slap. They planted spies because they feared your truth, but the spies came back fearing your power. Most returned empty-handed. They couldn't find anything broken enough to exploit. You didn't buckle, overshare, or play victim. You didn't give emotional entry points. Instead, you disarmed people just by being yourself. Some even came back changed because being around you did something unexpected. It exposed their own wounds. It awakened their own conscience. The plan backfired right in their faces. You might even wonder, how could people agree to spy on me? Simple. They underestimated who they were dealing with. They thought you were weak, predictable, easy to decode. What they didn't know was that the universe armored you long before the game even started. Imagine a soldier sent to capture a lion, only to return realizing the lion doesn't bow. That's what happened. Their plants walked in expecting to study you. Instead, they left studying themselves. They wanted intel. What they got was respect. Number 6. When the spies you never asked for switched sides. They sent people to study you, and those same people came back asking why the hell you were the target in the first place. Here's where the plot really cracks. The spies they planted around you didn't just fail, they started questioning them. Being near you did something none of the masterminds expected. It exposed the truth, not your truth, theirs. Because when someone sits close to a chosen one, they feel something real. Your calm isn't an act. Your authenticity isn't a strategy. Your silence isn't manipulation. You don't perform for attention, chase for validation, or twist yourself to be liked. You simply exist, and that existence alone made their whole operation look pathetic by comparison. Imagine this. A spy shows up thinking you're unstable, dramatic, easy to provoke. Instead, they find someone grounded, someone honest, someone who doesn't need an audience, and that contrast hits like a punch. Suddenly the spy's thinking, wait, why are we targeting them? They're not the problem. That's how you know the universe is playing chess while they're stuck playing tic-tac-toe. Here's the quote that stung them the most. They wanted spies to expose your flaws. Instead, your character exposed theirs. Some of those planted people started feeling uncomfortable. Not because of you, but because being around your energy reminded them how far they'd drifted from integrity. Your presence held up a mirror to the roles they played, the compromises they made, the systems they upheld without thinking. You didn't shame them. You didn't preach. You didn't confront. You simply existed with a level of self-respect and inner peace that made their actions feel hollow. And the chosen one in you may wonder, why did they switch sides? Because real strength is contagious, because real authenticity shakes foundations, because real integrity makes fake systems crumble. They went in to observe you. They came out questioning everything they believed. Number 7, the blueprint that should have broken you, but broke them instead. They didn't just try to ruin you, they followed a manual. And somehow you still walked out stronger than the people holding the instructions. Chosen one, this part is where the plot stops being messy and becomes organized warfare. They didn't act randomly. They had a 4-step plan crafted like some secret operation: isolation, provocation, narrative control, replacement. A whole blueprint built to erase you without ever getting their hands dirty. And here's the part they'll never admit. For a moment, they thought it was working. They celebrated too early. They underestimated the one thing they could never predict: your comeback. Let's break it down with the clarity they hoped you'd never gain. First came isolation. Imagine a chessboard where they start removing every piece around your king. They wanted you cornered, confused, doubting yourself. They thought if you stood alone, you'd fall. But isolation didn't weaken you. It awakened you. Next came provocation. They pushed buttons hoping you'd lose control. They needed you to explode so they could point and say, "See, this is why we targeted them." But your silence burned hotter than any reaction. You didn't break. You made them look ridiculous. Then narrative control. They rewrote your story without you present, whispered lies, spread half-truths, tried to make you the villain in rooms you weren't allowed to enter. But here's the quote that ends their fantasy. A fake story only works when the real one stays quiet. And your truth didn't. Finally, replacement. They thought swapping you out would erase you. Someone new, someone easier to manage. But replacements fail when the original is unforgettable. Chosen one, you might wonder, how did I survive all 4 steps? Because you weren't supposed to survive. You were designed to outgrow. Their blueprint didn't break you. It exposed them. Number 8, the silence that turned into your superpower. They thought isolation would erase you. Instead, it erased their illusion of power. Chosen one, this is the part of the story that truly haunts them. Out of everything they planned, everything they executed, everything they whispered, this was the glitch they never accounted for. You thriving in the very emptiness they built to break you. They expected the dark to swallow you. They expected loneliness to make you crawl. They expected the quiet to crush your mind. But you took that silence, flipped it, and turned it into something they couldn't fight: peace. Imagine this: they close the door on you, thinking the darkness will scare you. Instead, you sit down, breathe, and let the universe rearrange your entire identity. You build clarity, you build strength, you build self-respect, sharp enough to slice through every lie they fed you. While they waited for desperation, you found direction. While they waited for chaos, you found alignment. While they waited for collapse, you found yourself. Here's the quote that burns them the deepest. They isolated you to weaken you, but solitude was the one place where their influence couldn't follow. That's what they never understood. You weren't scared of silence, you were starving for it. The world had been loud for too long. Their manipulation had been draining for too long. Their noise, their opinions, their agendas. All of it worked only when you were distracted, but once you were alone, their power evaporated. Distance starved their control. Silence killed their narrative. Stillness exposed every truth. Right now, you might wonder, why did my growth in isolation bother them more than confrontation would have? Because confrontation gives them a role to play. Growth leaves them irrelevant. Confrontation lets them feel important. Peace proves they never mattered. Imagine a villain watching the hero they tried to bury rise from the dirt without a scratch. No screaming, no fighting, just rising. That image breaks them more than any revenge ever could. You didn't crumble in the emptiness they designed. You expanded. You didn't lose yourself in solitude. You discovered your real self. You didn't beg for company. You became company to your own peace. You were the glitch they never saw coming. The one variable they couldn't control. The one outcome they couldn't predict. The one person they couldn't break. And that glitch became a new war. Number 9. The moment your silence became their defeat. They weren't scared when you argued. They were scared when you stopped. Chosen one, this is the day everything shifted. Not when you got stronger, not when you healed, not when you finally saw the truth. The real turning point was brutally simple. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped defending your decisions like they deserved a courtroom. You stopped justifying boundaries like they were doing you a favor by respecting them. You stopped proving your worth to people who had already made up their minds. And the second you did that, something inside them collapsed. Imagine their shock. They push, expecting debate, and you give silence. They accuse, expecting tears, and you give silence. They twist your words, expecting long paragraphs, and you give silence. That silence wasn't emptiness. It was a message. It was closure. It was the end of their influence. Here's the quote that stabbed them the deepest. Silence is freedom, and freedom is something they can't control. You might wonder, why did my silence hit them harder than any argument? Because arguments keep them relevant. Silence erases them. Arguments feed their ego. Silence starves it. Arguments give them a stage. Silence removes the audience. Imagine someone trying to hold a puppet show, but the strings are gone. That's what your silence did. It cut every line they once used to pull you into chaos. Without your explanations, they had no script to twist. Without your defenses, they had no counterattacks to prepare. Without your emotional responses, they had no fuel. Your silence meant one terrifying truth. You were free, and they had no part in the new version of you. They didn't lose the argument. They lost access. They lost influence. They lost the version of you who needed to be understood. The day you stopped explaining yourself was the day they realized the war was already over. Number 10. The script they wrote to make you doubt your own eyes. They didn't confuse you by accident. They confused you on purpose. Chosen one, This part is the ugliest because it wasn't sloppy, emotional sabotage. It was coordinated. Every lie, every twist, every misunderstanding was planned like a group project. Their stories lined up too perfectly. Their reactions sounded too rehearsed. Their concern felt staged, almost theatrical. And when you started noticing the cracks in their performance, they didn't fix their behavior. They attacked your sanity. Classic move. Imagine a room full of people practicing lines about you like actors preparing for a play. One says, "If they bring up the truth, look confused." Another says, "If they question anything, call them sensitive." A third adds, "If they get too close, shift the blame." That's what you were up against, a fabricated reality built to suffocate your intuition. Here's the quote that slices through their whole operation. They didn't want you blind, they wanted you blind to them. And you might think, was I really that threatening? Why go this far? Because your clarity was their enemy, your intuition was a threat, your awareness was a weapon they couldn't disarm, so they did the only thing powerless people know how to do. They tried to rewrite your reality. They called you paranoid for noticing patterns. They called you sensitive for sensing danger. They called you unstable for refusing to swallow their staged storyline. But you weren't wrong. You were waking up. And waking up is what scared them. Imagine someone trying to convince you the sky isn't blue, but every time you look up, it betrays their lie. That's what your intuition did. It exposed everything they rehearsed. Their coordinated gaslighting didn't make you crazy. It made them visible, and once you saw behind the curtain, their whole reality fell apart. Number 11. The day your instinct outranked their opinion. They lost the battle the moment you stopped asking them who you were. Chosen one, this chapter is where everything snapped for good, not with drama, not with confrontation, but with something so simple they never prepared for. You started trusting your own body more than their version of reality. You stopped chasing their approval. You stopped waiting for them to confirm your intuition. You stopped letting their reactions decide what was real. Instead, you turned inward, and your nervous system, your gut, your inner radar, it all started speaking louder than their manipulation ever could. Imagine this. Your chest tightens around someone and you don't argue with it anymore. Your stomach drops after hearing a lie and you don't explain it away. Your breath steadies around truth and shakes around danger. And suddenly you listen. You don't negotiate with it. You don't silence it. You trust it. That shift alone broke every chain they ever wrapped around you. Here's the quote they never want you to remember. Your body knew the truth long before your mind stopped making excuses for them. You might wonder, why was trusting myself such a threat to them? Because once you listen inward, you stop depending outward. Once you tune into your instincts, you stop accepting their lies. Once your nervous system becomes the guide, their narrative becomes irrelevant. This was the moment their grip loosened permanently, not because they softened, but because you stopped swallowing what your body rejected. You stopped overriding your discomfort. You stopped betraying your own signals just to keep the peace. You became your own compass, and that meant their map no longer mattered. Imagine someone trying to lead you through fog, but suddenly your inner vision switches on. That's what happened. Their influence dissolved the moment your inner clarity returned. They didn't lose because you fought harder. They lost because you finally trusted yourself. Number 12. The confession that blew their whole story to ashes. They didn't crumble because you hurt them. They crumbled because you exposed the parts of themselves they spent years hiding. Chosen one, this is the moment their whole narrative collapsed, not because you fought back, not because you exposed them publicly, but because one of their own cracked under the weight of the truth. In a room full of masks, one finally slipped. And the words that came out were so raw, so unfiltered, that even the others froze. They weren't the victims. The real threat was how you made them feel about themselves. Imagine that silence. Imagine every face tightening, every throat swallowing, every ego shrinking. Because that single confession exposed the entire operation. You weren't dangerous because of what you did. You were dangerous because of what you revealed in them. Your presence made them confront insecurities they'd rather bury. Your strength made them feel small. Your authenticity made their performance look cheap. Your growth made their stagnation impossible to ignore. Here's the quote that stings them like salt on an open wound. They didn't fear losing you. They feared losing the version of themselves that looked stronger standing next to your pain. Jealousy dressed itself up as concern. Envy wrapped itself in advice. Fear disguised itself as control. They weren't saving you. They were trying to save their ego. And you might be thinking, why would my existence trigger them this deeply? Because you were everything they pretended to be. Because you grew without permission. Because you healed without their help. Because you stood tall while they leaned on lies. Imagine this metaphor. Your confidence was a flashlight, and every time you entered the room, it exposed cracks in their personality they'd been hiding from everyone, including themselves. They weren't ready to live in that brightness. They weren't ready to face their own reflection. One of them finally broke under that pressure. They admitted the thing the whole group already knew, but never dared to voice. You were never the villain. You were never the problem. You were never the danger. The threat was the way your truth made their lies impossible to believe anymore. That confession didn't just spill the truth. It shattered their entire structure. It ended the fantasy. It collapsed the storyline they rehearsed. It exposed the insecurity they tried to build an empire on. And once the truth was spoken, nothing they built could stand. Number 13, the replacement game that exposed their emptiness. They didn't replace you because you were forgettable. They replaced you because they couldn't handle how unforgettable you actually were. Chosen one, this part of the story is straight up embarrassing for them. The moment you stepped out of their system, not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly reclaiming your life, they panicked. They scrambled. They rushed to plug the hole your presence left behind. New faces popped up. Forced energy. Fake chemistry. Manufactured closeness. It was also painfully obvious, like watching someone glue cheap glitter onto a cracked vase and pretending it's good as new. But here's the truth they weren't ready for. You were never a position they could refill. You were an energy they couldn't recreate. Imagine this. Someone tries to replace the sun with a street lamp. That's what their attempts looked like. They thought the role mattered. They never realized it was you, your presence, your depth, your intuition, your impact that made the space valuable in the first place. And when they tried to replicate it, the universe made sure every copy fell flat. Here's the quote that haunts them at night. You didn't leave to destroy them. You left because their cage was too small for your evolution. And that's what broke them. You didn't attack. You didn't expose. You didn't fight. You simply stopped pretending their little world was enough for you. You walked out of the cage, and in doing so, you proved something they never wanted anyone, especially themselves, to realize. Escape was always possible. The bars weren't locked. The door wasn't sealed. You just had to stop believing their story. You might wonder, why did they rush to replace me if I wasn't the problem? Because replacements are a distraction, because replacements are denial, because replacements allow them to pretend you weren't irreplaceable. But here's what they discovered the hard way. Presence isn't something you swap out. Presence is something you feel, and every new person they pulled in only highlighted what they lost. Now they sit with regret, quiet, bitter, gnawing regret. Not because you collapsed, not because you begged, but because you didn't, because you stood up, stepped out, and never looked back. You were never the problem, you were the mirror. And mirrors, they're dangerous to people living in denial. Chosen one, now you finally see the truth they tried to bury. The plot broke, their control shattered, and your evolution exposed everything they feared. You didn't just survive their game, you ended it. And if this message hit exactly where it needed to, press the like button if you haven't already. And if you're still not part of our family, make sure to press that subscribe button. This mission grows every time someone like you decides to stay. The universe isn't done revealing what's next, and neither are we.